Well, good evening again. My name is Bob Graves, and I'm called the Unconventional Pastor. And in just a minute or two, I'm going to be back here with, well, as you know, everybody loves Phil. Well, cool to be back. And just as I had predicted, I was angry at Phil for only 6 days, and you're back just in time for me to no longer be angry at you for missing last
Thank
week.
you, Bob.
No,
Thanks.
he actually went to a wedding down in what, South Carolina, North Carolina,
North Carolina. Chapel Hill.
Yeah, and had a great time down there with family.
Yeah,
and
that's great.
And hopefully they did say I do. They didn't like walk out.
They said I do.
It happened.
Yes,
okay,
it happened.
good. I tell you, it's always so awkward when it doesn't. It's just one of those.
No,
weird
I'm having
moments,
second thoughts, honey. I'm
yeah.
sorry. No, they did.
Keep
They
it to
tied-
yourself.
They
Yeah,
tied
they
the
did.
knot. They tied the knot.
Excellent. Yeah. Oh, we've been chit-chatting for a while, and the truth is, some of the things we've been talking about, we've actually been involved in I don't know. I don't like to call it a coaching relationship. I prefer to call it just a friendship.
Mm-hmm.
But since we've been friends, there have been times when, things would come up and you'd talk to me, and I'd seek to try to, lift you up and treat you like a human being.
Comfort me.
And what have you.
Yep.
And, so we've had a relationship that's been, kind of, all building with each other. And I've enjoyed your friendship a great deal, so, there's a sense in which having you on here to do this is just a natural extension of what we've both been doing in the relationship we have with each other. And which, it's been great. And I'll tell you, I played in different bands over the years, but I got to be honest with you, I don't think I've ever played in a band where I felt the kind of camaraderie and brotherhood that we had. So it was great.
Wow.
Yeah, it was awesome. Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's
we were
good
friends.
to know. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I quit, I didn't miss you at all. No.
Yes, he did. Yes.
No, but anyhow, we've been talking about this in a sense of leading you through a type of life coaching, as it were, where we're not really talking so much about something that's therapeutic as much as, although it may be therapeutic in the broader sense of the term, it's not as though you're a person who just can't cope and deal with life and you really need some help. You're a person, you work, you're involved in a relationship, things are going. And there's a lot of things you're doing really well, but there's some ways in which this could work better, particularly in the way that you see yourself. And one of the things I'm curious about is you have seen in your own life examples of moments in time where prior to this moment you felt one way about yourself. This moment happens, and then after that moment, you feel very differently about yourself. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, in some of the negative ways, and not that I want us to drone on that, but can you think of some examples of things in life that where that happened?
Well, I could take you back around 20 years.
Yeah. Why don't you move in a little
Okay.
closer? You're
Yep.
almost at the edge of the.
All right.
You're almost in the. Yeah, there he goes.
Okay.
Right.
I can remember an incident like 20 years ago. We were at a family reunion,
Mm-hmm.
and my brother got together a bunch of cousins and such to play bocce ball. I don't know if you're familiar with bocce ball.
Yeah.
It's it's almost
hardly.
like it's similar to horseshoes. Okay, and I was left out because my brother didn't think I'd be able to catch on.
Yeah.
It's a very simple game.
Right.
You place a ball. You place like a mini bowling ball that we played on the beach.
What year would this been?
This was probably 1988, 89.
So you're in your upper 30s.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And I was feeling left out. Number one, left out. Number two, I was feeling a little inferior. I was feeling kind of like, why is he doing this to me? Why am I being left out?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a fairly simple game, and he didn't think I'd be able to catch on. And he said, "Phil, why don't you wait it out? You watch while we play." I'm like, and I was getting angry.
Yeah.
I was really getting angry and frustrated, and
I'm curious though. Before you finish that, why do you think he said that to you?
Because he was my big brother.
Okay.
And he didn't think I'd be able to play with the big boys.
Probably not, but also at the same time. And by the way, his brother is a wonderful guy. You know, whenever you have family, there's always that situation of people vying for, you know, who's king of the mountain, and so those dynamics get involved in there. Sure. But I tell you, he's in a band called Rewind down in North Carolina.
Yes.
You ever get a chance to see them, they're really good. And if they ever pull out a Rolling Stones song, look out.
Mick Jagger, my brother does a mean Mick Jagger, right?
He does.
Bob?
I watched him do this, and it's like, it's amazing. We did what, Satisfaction? Is that what we did? We played Satisfaction at McGurk's one night, and he was there, and he came up, and he grabbed the mic, and he put on.
He just took over.
And you know that energetic. The only way a 70-year-old can, running around the stage like crazy. No, but Mick Jagger is, still moving around. But he put on the whole thing, and it was awesome, very entertaining.
It's great.
But anyway, and we've had him play with us a couple of times when he's been visiting in the area. But anyhow, so now notice this. Later, you had mentioned to me earlier that you had then called him, but before you called him, how are you feeling about yourself from the moment you were left out of that bocce game? By bocce, wasn't that what they played in Star Wars?
I don't know.
No, bocce was a
ball.
speech. Bocce was a speech.
No, this is bocce ball.
Yeah, right, okay. I'm confusing my words.
And it's a lot like horseshoes.
Right.
You know, you're trying to get the ball. There's a ball that's placed a certain point.
Is it thrown first, the first ball? Somebody throws the ball and everyone's trying to throw the ball in the same place.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I think I've seen it. I have never played it.
It's an Italian sport.
I'd have to sit it out.
It's an Italian sport, I think.
Anyway, so how are you feeling about yourself between the time that incident happened and before you talked to your brother about it?
Well, I was feeling kind of, what's wrong with me? I mean, I was feeling inferior.
Mm-hmm.
Inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily stupid. I couldn't understand. I couldn't understand why he would
not give you that moment.
Not give me that opportunity.
Did you have any feelings about the fact that you didn't seem to have within you some way of effectively
expressing
and winning the moment over? Instead, he wins and you sit it out.
I felt helpless.
Okay, yeah. And that you were helpless.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was like, nothing was, like I couldn't speak out.
And then along comes a moment when you speak to him. No, what happened in that moment?
Well, I thought about it. This was in the afternoon, and something clicked inside of me. And I said, no, I'm not gonna let him get away with this.
Yeah.
It got to the point where I just said to myself, no, I'm going to confront him.
Yeah.
Can I use the word P?
You can use any word you feel is expressive
Okay,
and proper.
pardon my French, but I was a little pissed.
Yeah.
And I said, no, I'm not going to leave this alone.
Right.
I'm going to call him and tell him how I feel. And I felt I had the power.
Okay. Awesome.
I put the power back.
Right.
I gave it back to me.
Okay.
The
good.
power.
Yeah. And so then you
I
talked
took
to
it
him.
back.
Right. And then you talked.
And I said, look, I don't appreciate the way I was treated. I'm not going to take that anymore from you. I felt you were putting me down, and I felt put down, and I felt inferior and everything else. And I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Yeah.
And I'm really mad at you.
And without us having to necessarily go through all the detail of how that conversation, when you left that conversation after confronting him, did anything then change again in the way you felt about yourself?
Well, I felt I gained a little more respect for myself.
For yourself?
Yeah.
Did you feel you gained any respect from Jim?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kind of change the rules of the relationship.
Like,
yeah.
Okay, Phil. All right.
Yeah.
Now you're right.
Let me ask you a question though, and nothing against Jim at all intended by this, but do you think it's possible that when Jim asked you to sit out, that he's not, although he may not have thought you had the adequate ability to play bocce well, is it possible that he is just so gung-ho in wanting to win, he felt you would be a liability? Mm-hmm. And the truth was, he's not really thinking so much of the way you're going to feel about being disallowed. He just wants a win.
You know what it is? It's ego-based.
It's testosterone.
Yes. It's ego-based.
Right. But, and by the way...
And when I play a game,
right,
we play for the sportsmanship.
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know.
I
play to win.
No. But it's ego.
It can be
ego.
Yeah. And yet it's also, he is so focused on winning,
right,
that he's not. The truth is, he had no intention of creating in you the impact it does create in you. So that many times, the point that I'm trying to make here is this: there's two that I think are important to point out. Number one, notice this: it's not the idea that made you feel inadequate. It was the moment, the experience, the going through that moment.
Mm-hmm.
It was also not just the idea of, well, how can you say this to me? It was the actual success in confronting him. That moment too,
right.
So the two things we're saying is that his view of you is not so much what affects you as much as your view of you.
Right.
What you thought it said about you, where the position you thought it put you in. And the good news in that is this: you have more control over what it is you think of yourself than anybody else does.
Absolutely.
So
yes.
long as you
yes.
don't give them the right, as you said, you took the power back.
Right.
You don't let other people define who you are. You're going to define who you are. And there's a sense here in which I'm even arguing nobody really knows who they are. But we're not going to allow ourselves to be pigeonholed into some sort of limited, way. And I'll tell you what, even if you weren't as good at bocce as he is, you could get there by doing it. And
let me interject something here. And again, I don't think he was thinking of my feelings. He was thinking like this.
Right.
Well, I'm going to play this game.
Let's stack the deck as best we can.
That's right. I'm not out to hurt Phil's feelings. But he had one goal in mind.
Yeah. Right. Now, yes.
And I don't think he knew how it was affecting me.
Oh, no doubt. In fact, chances are, your brother is a sweet enough guy and a thoughtful enough guy that if he really understood the way that was affecting you, he would try to find some other way of doing that.
Yes. Yes.
He might still try to find a way of winning, but
But it was very competitive and very I want to win at all costs.
And by the way, it doesn't make sense. Well, it does make sense, but
you see how it rubbed off on me?
Oh yeah,
it took a negative.
Right. Yeah, and think about it. It would not work if in public we men, who can sometimes be this way, were to say something like this. Instead of saying, Phil, I want you to sit out because I don't know if you know how to do this. If I were to say instead, Phil, I want you to sit out because I want to win. And I don't want you to be a liability at all. I want to win, so I'm going to ask you to sit.
Right.
That's a little too honest.
Right.
Yeah.
So he had to mask it somehow.
Right. And he masked, and the truth was he's masking the honesty. And he's so busy masking the honesty, he doesn't realize that what he's also doing is slapping you in the face.
No,
He didn't
right,
realize that.
right.
So we can, in some sense, we can forgive him. He didn't really intend to have that impact on it.
Right.
He's just doing what brothers do.
Right.
You know?
I'm the number two. Remember that. I'm the number two brother.
Just doing what brothers
I'm
do.
the second born.
But the thing is this. Notice this. It wasn't so much the ideas that put you down, made you feel inadequate, or that took your power back. It wasn't so much the ideas. It was the moments. Do you see that?
Mm-hmm.
This means, as I understand it, that we come to have feelings about ourselves based on observations of ourselves in moments.
Right.
Not just, when I stop to think about it. No, it's when this happens and I see this, or when this happens and that changes, or when this happens and that doesn't change, or when this happens and this person relating to me in this manner. It's when we're in the midst of these general observations within a moment, these general observations of changes we feel or see or don't feel or see while other things are changing, and these moments where a person of influence whose opinion affects us. These are the moments when we come to these horrible conclusions. This is who I must be.
Right.
Now, when we do that, we don't always do that in a way that is fair, kind, honest, or authentic, which means all of us, not just you, but me too, we have gone through a lifetime of going through moments that we enter that moment feeling one way about ourselves, and we leave that moment feeling another way about ourselves. And those differences in the way we feel are not always fair, proper, or realistic.
Right.
Meaning you would feel very different about yourself if your history was totally different. Now, let me ask you a question. This is very important. Maybe it's a little too philosophical. I don't know. But doesn't this really mean also that the way you feel about yourself isn't really you? It's just your history?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it isn't even you to begin with.
Right.
It's just your history. Right. Yeah. So had you had a different history, well, guess what? The history in the moment does affect you.
I might not be here right now.
Yeah.
Why do I need to be on this show? Why do I need life coaching? Why do I need this? Why do I need this?
You don't need it. You can benefit from it, but you don't need it. You're in fact, I would say that if my attempts to talk to you about this, you see, I have a degree in human development, so I'm supposedly an expert at this stuff. Okay, so I've studied this stuff.
Right.
So maybe I know something. Maybe I can help you in that. But if I were to try to help you in a way where the net result of trying to help you is your feeling about yourself, like, oh gosh, boy, do I need help, then I'm not helping you.
Right.
I'm not helping you. That ain't the kind of help you need.
Right.
And although I do believe we can benefit from insight and help from people who study this kind of stuff, I absolutely, I reject that notion of that it's really of help where the person who's helping you is trying to be the hero or the you don't need that crap.
Right.
You really don't. But what I was saying is that notice though that it's the moments that make these change. Therefore, moments are very important.
Well, yeah.
Not just the ideas that you grab from those moments, but the moments themselves. And this means this. One way that you can change the way you feel about yourself is by deliberately creating moments. Just as you did there. You came inside yourself and you said, self, I'm putting up with this. I'm going to call my brother and I'm going to talk to him. And what did you do? You created a moment that gave you a different way of looking at yourself as a result of that moment. Yes. You can continue to do that. In fact, many times we call this what we call a minimal effective response. M-E-R. It's a very common term. But a minimal effective response is whenever we need to somehow rearrange a dynamic in a relationship, we need to do something that will be for us, not necessarily for the other person, but for us, effective, a new response that allows us to walk away from that moment a different person.
Okay.
And we also want it to be minimal. I mean, for example, one way you could feel better about yourself when dealing with somebody who's been, let's not talk about your brother, let's talk about somebody else we won't mention.
Well, can
Sure.
I interrupt you for
Sure.
a minute? Are you talking about self-preservation?
It could be. It could be. I'm talking about also just self-knowledge, but self-preservation would certainly be a part of it. But without mentioning anyone in particular, um, uh, one way you could handle certain conflicts would be, you bring out a gun, you shoot him. Now,
That would solve a lot of
this
problems.
is an effective response, but it's not what I would call minimal effective response.
Right, right.
Whenever you find a moment that you need to create, you want it to be a minimal effective response, which means this. First of all, it has to be a response. And it means it has to be something you do, where your activity is what's bringing about that moment. This is a moment brought about by you.
Right.
So it's a response. Effective. It can't just be a stab at something. It has to be something that really allows you to walk away from that moment feeling
well
differently.
thought out.
Right. But it has to be effective.
Right.
You can't just express your disappointment with somebody or the way you felt about something in a manner that is going to, okay, so you said that. Well, go away, you little boy. You bother me.
It doesn't affect any change.
Right.
It doesn't affect.
So it needs to be effective, okay? But it also needs to be minimal. That it means don't pick any responses that are not going to be effective. But of all the possible things you could do that would be an effective response, which is the one that has the least amount of fallout attached to it?
Right.
That's the one you pick.
Right.
So we want a minimal effective response.
In other words, it doesn't. You don't want to destroy someone. You don't want to hurt someone. You don't want to. You just want to express your true feelings, and express them in an effective way.
Hopefully to be understood.
To be understood.
But when I'm saying effective, I don't necessarily mean, for example, it's not necessary. It would be helpful, but it's not necessary that, for example, back then, going back to Jim, it would not have been necessary for you to have effectively changed Jim.
Oh, right.
But
right.
it would have been necessary for you to have effectively changed you.
Right.
I'm the brother who, when he's leaving me out, doesn't put up with it. And now that's the brother you are. Right?
Now, you know what? I just thought of something.
Lean into the camera.
I just thought of something, Bob. Your parents can have a direct influence on how you, the dynamic with your siblings.
Sure.
I was always taught, okay, he's your older brother. You got to respect him.
Yeah.
So I took it as everything he says is going to be gospel.
Right.
Everything he says,
yeah.
Okay, he's here and he's here, I'm here.
Right.
And that's the way it's always going to be.
Yeah.
No matter what he says to you,
how
no
much
matter
older?
what he does to you, you're not allowed to talk back to him.
Right. How much older was he?
3 years.
Okay. So when he's 13 and you're 10, you have to have this attitude about him and yourself. Okay, but
it was brought on by my parents.
Yeah, but the thing was, when he's 16 and you're 13, why aren't you entitled to that attitude?
Right.
Right. Yeah. Now, and parents can, and in culture and society, we assign people roles, and we give them to people in some ways, and that totally unjustified in an arbitrary manner. We give them this role, and then there they sit eternally, as it were.
Right.
And yet,
but it could be destructive.
It is destructive. Not can be. It is destructive.
Yeah.
It's hard to do, but parents have to find a way of, Jim may have certain privileges because he's this old and this capable, right. And then you have those same privileges when you're just as old or just as capable,
Right.
and to try to do that it's not easy for parents to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, the baby of the family is always the baby, and the adult in the family is always the adult, and the elder is usually the one who's going to become the new family patriarch and stuff like that.
Or the sister.
Yeah. So this is a sense in which it shapes the role people play.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not, I want to argue, it does not change who you are. It just changes who you think you are. Now that you're an adult, this is all very interesting, but this doesn't have to remain. So this brings me to another question. Since you and I have been talking, and this even goes back before we were on the air together. You know, since we got in the band together, that was what, 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think that there were many ways in which, as a result of the way you were encouraged to think differently about yourself, you came into many of these events and moments and left them very different than the way you would have in the past.
Yes.
For example, when we're trying to learn something like the song I Feel Fine, which for the rhythm guitar part is not an easy thing to play.
You're playing way up on the neck.
And you're playing in a pattern that
I had a fear.
Right. And so you tried it. And what did I do? Do you remember?
You were in shock. You said, that's fantastic.
Right.
You picked it up.
Right.
That's great.
But the first time you tried it, you couldn't get it. Remember? What was my reaction then?
Just go home and practice.
Get it, yeah.
You'll get it.
Right.
You'll get it.
Now,
it'll come.
Without mentioning
it. Yeah, and that's people, believe me, that's his attitude.
Yeah.
You're going to get it. You're going to get it.
And I knew that I knew you had a past. Let's not talk about anyone specific, but I knew you had a past where as a guitar player, when you tried to play something, if you couldn't play it, people would say things like, "Nah, don't do it. No, I'll do it. No, you strum these chords." And so, what did you do? You strummed the chords.
That was my role.
Yeah. Now, I
assume my role.
Now, I must confess and let everybody out there know that some of the things I said weren't really all that kind. I picked a favorite phrase that really you didn't like. I would say, Phil, stop playing.
Oh, Kumbaya.
Kumbaya. Yeah,
Kumbaya.
Said, stop playing Kumbaya.
No, come on. You can attack that guitar. Attack it.
You heard that enough from me that it did bother you at times. I certainly didn't mean to do that, but it did.
I know.
But at the same time,
it shook me up.
It did, yeah. Nonetheless, so what did you do? You went home, you practiced, you worked at it, and next thing you know, you're doing all kinds of things you never did. You came over here the other day and you showed me something you're doing, the kind of thing you would have never tried before.
No.
Okay, I'll tell you this. When I first met you back then, or when I first met you when we were teenagers, but when I first met you with a band we got involved with, I could see that there were some things you were struggling with, but I knew exactly why you were struggling with them. You'd never had the opportunity to figure them out, and you never had the opportunity to feel good enough about yourself to say, hey, I can do this.
Right. That's exactly right.
But I knew you had a brain. I knew you could hear things. I knew there was this. To me, it said, there's no reason why you can't do this. We're just waiting for that moment to discover it. And I'm definitely a person committed to this philosophy. If there's something you've never done before, there is no way for you to know if that's something you could never do or something you just have never done yet.
Right.
There's no, and now it may be true that there are things you could never do, but we don't know what those are. We never will know what they are. We'll only discover that when you discover how to do something, that's one of those things that isn't in that list, and the things that are on the list are unknown. So it works. But you see, then here's the moment. It's not that you went home and you thought about it and you say, no, I can do this. I know I can do this. No, you go home, you practice it, you do it.
Right.
You come away from that moment. Here again, you see how important the moment is. Doesn't that moment have a powerful ability to erase the false conclusions of a ton of other moments? Now,
it's freedom.
It is.
It's freedom. It's a form of freedom.
Right. However, let's notice this. One of those successful moments doesn't seem to all by itself erase all those other previous moments.
Right.
There's a sense in which the other one is so deeply ingrained that it can take a few moments like that for it to become completely dissolved into the house of cards that can then fall apart. So it's important for you to continue to develop various different moments where you do that, and recognize it. You bite off what you can chew, work with it, and you'll get to different places. And then when you leave that, you'll discover, I can do that. And then comes the day, and in some ways it's really already here, but then comes the day when you realize, I wonder what else it is I really am adequate at doing, and I just haven't figured it out yet. Now, when you begin to approach that moment where you're feeling a little bit inadequate, you're going to feel a little different. How do you imagine you're going to feel different in that moment where you're tempted to feel inadequate?
I'm going to say, I've done it before.
Exactly.
I can do it again.
The feeling of inadequacy doesn't possess the same credibility it used to have.
It
Right.
evaporates.
Right.
And it's
a real
steps,
feeling. It's
but
a
it's,
real
you know,
feeling.
it took me small steps.
Right. Yeah.
But eventually, those steps become
Right.
giant steps, and it's a great feeling.
It is. It is.
It's a feeling. It's a freedom. It's a freedom.
And it reminds me of the learned helplessness experiment, which was a horrible experiment. Did we talk about it on the air? I can't remember. It's possible. It wasn't Pavlov. It was some other guy, but working with dogs.
Right.
They took these dogs from
response.
They took them down this hallway into a room, put them in a cage, and gave them a certain electrical shock.
Am I a dog now?
No, but you used to sometimes think of yourself that way, right? But they put these dogs in the cage. At first, the dogs would resist, but they had enough. They had the kind of harnesses, and the experimenters were wearing the sort of gear where it was safe enough for them. These dogs were not going to succeed. They were going to get put in that cage, and they were going to get their shock. And once they got their shock, they were taken back down the hallway to their. After a while, the dogs, when they would come to get them, they would walk obediently down the hallway with the trainer, get into the cage without being forced, wait for their shock, and then go. And then as the experiment went on, they then start to do things like not close the cage door. Dogs would go in, take their shock, and come out. They would then finally remove a side of the cage. And they get down to the point to where their cage is no longer there, just the bottom plate of the cage. The dogs would still come in, lay down as it were on the cage plate, and take their shock and go. There's a learned helplessness. Think about it. If they had ever tried to shock the dog initially by just putting it on a plate, that dog would have never put up with it.
Right.
But it learned its helplessness. I would like to suggest that we all as human beings do, in a sense, learn a great deal of helplessness. And it's a lie. It is something we've learned.
Oh, yeah.
It is something we went through moments. We concluded from this moment, I'm helpless. And so since I believe I'm helpless, I am not going to do something that's going to demonstrate to me or make me feel painfully aware of how helpless I am, or that's going to, when you do something you can't do, like jumping off a 100-foot cliff to jagged rocks below, and then you skip to my loo as you leave, you can't do that, so you're not enthusiastically jumping over the cliff, right?
Who do I used to identify a lot with George from Seinfeld.
Oh, yeah. Costanza.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
I mean, it's the George Costanza.
That's his persona.
That's his persona.
And he's always doing things that are really trying to hide and work around his inadequacies. Right. And it gets him in trouble. But as you overcome that, all of us are there at that point of that learned helplessness, where the truth is, a great deal of what keeps us from doing things well is that we've just learned a whole bunch of lies about ourselves. Now, I'll tell you what, people are going to laugh at us sometimes when we make mistakes. I don't care. Let them. There'll come a point when two things change. Not just the way you feel about yourself after a moment, but the other thing that's going to change is this. Since you are the one who's going to be, through the minimal effective response, creating certain deliberate moments, you're also going to start to take control of something else. You're the one who's in charge of what it is you believe is true about you as a result of that moment, not anybody else. What they say is just their opinion. You decide for yourself what is really true about you. You start to take more control over that, and then there comes a point in time where nobody can take that away from you. They can try, but there's nothing they can do about it. If a person wants you to listen to their opinion about you, and you don't want to buy into their opinion about you, there's nothing they can do to make you do that. They can torture you, you can do whatever you want. You're just, anything they do to you, try and force upon you, is only going to persuade you they're an ass or an idiot or something,
Right.
So you learn to take control of your own view of yourself.
Because the truth is contained within.
Right. if not the truth, at least the workable model of that truth.
Right.
And so that's the way.
No one can take it away from you.
No.
It's inside.
Particularly once you've owned it. Think about it. If have you ever had $60,000 in your possession?
No.
No. If somebody ever gave you $60,000 in your possession, and then people start nibbling it away from you by sneaking it away from you, taking it away from you, tricking you out of it,
right,
until you get back down to zero, you might feel awful. But I guarantee you, if you ever had then another $60,000 given to you, and people start nibbling it away from you, that time you'd go, I don't think so, right? There would be a little bit, you'd learned your lesson about the way people are trying. Well, you know what? I'm not talking about $60,000. I'm talking about something far more valuable than that. You, a human being, a wonderful, beautiful, precious life. That's you. Don't let anybody ever take that away from you. Not by an inch. You maintain control over exactly who it is you believe yourself to be. And you don't have to be absurdly ridiculous, like, I'm wonderful, I can do everything and anything. No. You don't need to get absurd and ridiculous. No. You don't know what your limits are. You definitely have them. But I'll tell you what, you can do the things you need to do, and you can find an adequate response that's authentically you for every single situation that you're in. And the more you realize how true that is, the less you have to play the George Costanza role. Right?
That's right. That's right.
And instead, you can play some other. I don't. There's nobody else in that. That comedy was made up of dysfunctional people in different ways.
Well, and it affects you physically.
It does.
My sister, I won't mention her name, but my sister, when she was young, she'd be like this,
just all kind of huddled up.
Huddled up, and we'd always comment on it. Shauna, look at that picture. Shauna, she's shy and.
Yeah. But she's quite an entertainer today.
Oh, yeah.
Bunny Lake.
Because she's been to see Bob.
I didn't have anything to do that one. But
she's been through therapy. Yeah. She's been through
Bunny Lake. They gotta Google Bunny Lake, and she's quite an entertainer.
Yeah. It's on Google. They can Google YouTube.
So now where this leaves us is this. We have been talking about memorable moments that I see as metaphors. That is general observations. The things you notice about yourself in the processes of change. That includes changes in you or changes around you. And the way that other people have an opinion of you. Let me ask you this. Of all the people you know, whose opinion seems to impact you the most? That's not good. Although I think it may be helpful.
No,
I'm glad to be an influence. But
no, ask the question again.
Of all the people who have an influence over you, who's the person who has the most credible influence with you? Yeah. Good or bad. Because you're the one who decides that what everyone else says about you is valid or invalid. Yeah. It's your decision, right? So you are the person who has the most influence over what you think about you.
I control.
Right. But if you didn't know that, what are you going to do? You're just going to passively move along and let it happen by default.
And control. You can, control could be good and bad.
It can. Yeah. Right. So let it be more natural. As long as it's authentic, as long as it's real, as long as it's honest, it's your job. It's your responsibility. It's your decision. It's your influence. And the truth is that even if there's anything that I say to you that helps you, it doesn't help you until you decide it has validity. Right. Yeah. And you know what? The truth is, as ingenious as my ideas may or may not be, they're just the ideas that make sense to me. And, it's very likely that some of the ideas that I could share with you are like they just don't resonate with who you are.
I think life is a series of, you can second guess yourself also in certain situations.
Right.
Okay, is my response going to be, is it going to be, what's the word I'm looking for? Appropriate. There's certain situations where you want to say something and you don't know, okay, should I say something now? This person said something to me. Now, is he trying to be helpful? Is he trying to be constructive? Because people can be constructive and at the
Right.
same time be uh, criticizing you.
Yeah.
Um,
They can give you a punch and a hug at the same time.
well, no,
without
they think
realizing
they think they're giving constructive criticism when they're not.
it. Right.
They're being destructive.
Right.
You know. So I still have a problem with that.
And
You know?
at the same
Like,
time,
okay,
though,
how do I respond to this?
well, you know
Is
what?
he trying to be? Is he? You know what I mean? You're
Right.
always second guessing.
I would caution you with two things. Number one, trial and error is awesome. Error ain't so bad. The truth is, what if you pick wrongly
Hmm.
and you discover you picked wrongly? Well, wonderful. That's okay.
Accept it. Accept it.
And here's why. And I've said this before. Where does good judgment come from? Good judgment comes from experience. Where does the experience come from? Bad judgment.
Mhm.
So you've got nothing to lose. When you have to judge, do the best you can. If it turns out to be bad judgment, you now have the experience to make better judgments.
Right.
If you're in a situation and you have to make a judgment, it turns out to be good. Well, now you go. Now you got some experience with that, and you understand a little bit better.
Okay.
So
you're always learning.
so right. So it's a process. Let it be a process. The process does not require perfection. It requires, if more than anything, authenticity. So you're free. Make mistakes. Make mistakes. You know
Yeah.
what? And in fact, that's exactly how you learn how to play I Feel Fine.
Life
You made
isn't-
a few mistakes,
Yeah.
but who cares?
Life
you know?
isn't scripted.
Right. And no, it isn't, nor are solutions. And so by doing this, the more freedom you have, you see, if I make you feel inadequate, every time you do something that doesn't quite work out, that becomes to you proof of how inadequate you are. But that's a lie. No, that's just proof that you haven't figured it out yet. That's all it is.
Mm-hmm.
So if you feel as though I have the freedom to discover my adequacy, and then you do something and it doesn't work, instead of saying, "Oh, that's proof of how inadequate I am," that's really just proof of, well, I haven't figured that one out yet, have I? Big deal.
There's freedom in that.
Right, absolutely. Big deal. So there's no hurry, there's no rush, there's no pressure, there's nothing to do except be you in these moments, period.
Right.
And guess what? You're already you. So the rest is just learning curve. You don't even have to become you. You're already you. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And that's
It's all
why
there.
that's why everybody loves Phil, right?
Right.
Because they should. It's just the right thing to do.
I love me.
Good. Yes. Right. Now, what we want to talk about, and we'll probably look at this during this week, and we'll get into talking about it, is we want to take a look at some of the things that you might be able to do that could create for you moments under your control, under your architecture, where you, in doing that, turn some of these feelings around in a different way so that you can come away from that moment having a greater freedom to just simply be you, freedom to make the mistakes you might make while you're on the learning curve, and freedom to be in the learning curve. Because I'll tell you what, none of us came out of the womb knowing what we eventually learned. So your future is better off when you are comfortable in the learning curve. Not when you finally get someplace,
Right.
but when you can be exactly where you are now and comfortable with the learning curves that you are currently involved in. Right?
Right.
So we'll next week when you come back, we'll try to take a look at that. I'm not sure exactly where we are for time, but I think we got like about 5 more minutes. I'm curious. Since you've been on the air, how do you feel about all this stuff we've been talking about? I mean, we're talking about some of the stuff about you. We're getting a little personal and revealing things about you. How are you feeling about all this?
I feel very good. I feel very positive. I don't know. I walk away. I come away thinking, wow, there's so much out there to discover about
There's
myself.
so much in there to discover.
Yeah. And that's what I feel. Hope.
Yeah.
Hope.
Good. Yeah.
You know?
And you know what? It just so happens to be that you have human DNA and you're a human being. And out there watching us happen to be a lot of other human beings.
Right.
So the truth is, your experience is in many ways, maybe the details are different, but the dynamics are very much the same.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I hope you do feel good about is this: in the vulnerability and the personal things that you're talking about in yourself, you're helping an awful lot of people out there.
I hope
They're
so.
saying they're saying
hope so.
I can relate to that. You know,
Yeah.
I've gone through this. This makes sense to me. I know what you're talking about. Been there, done that. You know, and so in a real way, there's one thing I want to point out about that. I'm not saying that just to make you feel good about what you've done, although I'd like you to feel good about it. I want to say that for this reason: all of those things in your past that didn't work well, all those things in your past that were uncomfortable, this is not to say that it was a good thing they happened. It isn't. Ways in which you were made to not believe in yourself, that was never good, not for a moment. Got the dog in here. That was never good, not for a moment. Nonetheless, it doesn't matter what has ever happened in your life that tore you down or that put you at the bottom of the totem pole. If that's what it did, that can still be a learning experience. Mm-hmm. There's something good you can get out of it. I'm not one to believe that, well, God meant it to happen this way. I don't think he did. I'm not one to believe that, well, this was really for your good. It wasn't. When somebody violates you, you're violated. That's never good. It's never acceptable and it's never right. But when it does happen, there is something you can learn about yourself. One of the things you can learn about yourself is this: it's not possible that some of these negative things that happened to you could have ever hurt you if you weren't really intrinsically valuable to begin with. Because if you weren't valuable, it would not have hurt.
Right.
So there's a sense in which even all that negative stuff in the past is proof you're a valuable human being.
Wow.
It is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't have hurt.
Right.
Otherwise, it's also proof that some of these things are not the way you treat a human being.
We're flesh and blood.
Right.
With heart.
Yeah. But do you see that, though, how it's proof that you shouldn't treat a human being? Because look what the results were. It caused somebody to feel this way about themselves, and it was a lie. So we shouldn't do that to people. You know, it's just not good. And so that also not only helps you to redeem yourself, but it turns you into a more wonderful person.
And you can help other people.
Exactly. How are you going to treat your wife knowing the way things can affect people? How are you going to treat your children? How are you going to treat your neighbor? When you realize what you needed and didn't get, and how you've been able to nonetheless redeem that, it causes you to say, well, I am going to rise to the occasion, be the person that creates moments for other people they can walk away from feeling very good about themselves.
Yes, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
You know, and then in a sense, from there, it comes around full circle. And I've seen you do that because you sometimes talk to me, well, even before the show, without mentioning anybody, you're talking about somebody else that you're feeling badly about, what they're going through and the conundrums they're facing, and the fact that they don't seem to be fully aware of what they're walking into or what's going on, and it's because you care about what's going on with them, and that's your recognition that even they are struggling with a few of these kinds of issues where they could only see and understand some things through some better moments for them,
right,
that they would come away from it differently. Well, anyway, there we go. I think that we're going to call it there. Okay. And thanks for being back. You'll be back next week, right?
Yes, I will.
Awesome. Okay. And so there we are with another installment. He's back from the wedding of Everybody Loves Phil, and we'll see you back here next week. Coming up, the Cult of Honesty and the Hangout is going to be talking about modesty, I understand. We discussed a couple of other different topics to possibly talk about, and I think that we decided that we're going to wait another week before we to see where this all goes before we continue talking about or begin talking about the government shutdown. But coming up in about 10 minutes, we'll be talking about modesty on the Cult of Honesty, and so I'll be back for that show as well. See you then. This is Bob Graves, the Unconventional Pastor, with my good friend Phil. Everybody loves Phil.